My daughter stole all our neighbors' pets. I'm on her side. When I came home from work and saw my neighbor Mrs. Mitchell putting up signs for her missing pets, I told her I'd come help her look as soon as I changed my clothes. Then I walked inside to find her 4 dogs, 3 cats, and 2 ferrets doing laps in our living room. My daughter looked me right in the eye and said, "I'm not giving them back." "Olivia, what have you done?" I screamed, watching a tabby cat leap from our couch to the mantel while a beagle burrowed under the throw pillows. "I saved them," Olivia said, but I wasn't listening. I immediately went back outside and told Mrs. Mitchell she needed to come to my house right away. She followed me inside and gasped when she saw her pets sprawled across our living room. The moment she entered, all 4 dogs scrambled behind Olivia, and the cats scattered to high furniture. "You stole my animals?" Mrs. Mitchell screamed at Olivia. "I'm calling the police right now. This is theft." "Call them," Olivia said calmly while the beagle trembled against her leg. "Then I'll tell them what you've been doing to these animals." Mrs. Mitchell's face went red as she ranted about having the pets for years, and how my daughter needed professional help. The ferrets had wedged themselves under our entertainment center at the sound of her voice. "Mom, I hear things while I'm babysitting her daughter," Olivia said, stroking the German Shepherd mix that was trying to hide its massive body behind her small frame. "I see what goes on in that house." "Nothing goes on except normal family life," Mrs. Mitchell snapped. Olivia described how the dogs stayed in basement cages all day, never going outside except for 2-minute bathroom breaks. She pointed out the infected wounds on the cats and the painful matting on the ferrets. Now that she mentioned it, I could see one dog's visible limp and the crusty discharge around a gray cat's eyes. Mrs. Mitchell insisted they just had minor health issues she was addressing, claiming vet care was expensive for a single mother. "You spent $3,000 on a purse last month," Olivia said flatly. "I saw the receipt." "What I spend my money on is none of your business," Mrs. Mitchell said, stepping forward. The German Shepherd whimpered and pressed harder against Olivia. "Those are my animals, and I demand you return them immediately." "When was the last time you took any of them to a vet?" I asked, noticing how their ribs showed through their fur. Mrs. Mitchell said that wasn't relevant, that they were her property and my daughter was a thief. Every time she moved, the animals shrank away from her. One cat had climbed on top of our bookshelf and wouldn't come down. "Want me to tell you why I actually took them?" Olivia said, and my stomach dropped. She explained that yesterday while babysitting, she'd overheard Mrs. Mitchell on the phone negotiating to sell all the animals. The woman had said she didn't care what happened to them as long as she got paid. "You misunderstood," Mrs. Mitchell said, her face pale now. "I was talking about finding new homes because I'm overwhelmed. You gave them the address of a biomedical research facility," Olivia continued. "That's an animal testing lab. They pay people for animals. You were getting $3,000 for the dogs, $1,500 for the cats, $500 for the ferrets." The smaller dog, some kind of terrier mix, had crawled into Olivia's lap and was shaking. The other animals had formed a circle around my daughter like she was their protector. "They're my animals," Mrs. Mitchell shouted. "I can do whatever I want with them. If I want to donate them to help advance science, that's my right." "Donate?" Olivia stood up, and the animals moved with her. "You negotiated them up to $5,000 total. The lab is picking them up tomorrow while your daughter's at school so she won't see." "Your daughter loves these animals," I said, finally understanding everything. "How could you send them to a lab to be tortured?" "My daughter will get over it," Mrs. Mitchell said coldly. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "If you don't return my property right now, I'm pressing charges. Your daughter will have a criminal record." The animals were all huddled near Olivia now. Even the cats had come down from their perches to sit near her feet. When Mrs. Mitchell stepped toward them, they all backed away as a group. "They're legally mine with paperwork to prove it," Mrs. Mitchell said. "You're harboring stolen property. The lab is expecting them tomorrow and I'll lose $5,000 if they're not delivered." She smiled coldly at me. "I'll sue you for the lost income plus emotional distress. Return them now or deal with the police and lawyers." I looked at my daughter surrounded by terrified animals that clearly knew she'd saved them. The beagle had its head buried in her armpit. The cats were winding around her legs. The ferrets had emerged just enough to hide behind her sneakers. "Mom?" Olivia asked, holding the shaking terrier. Mrs. Mitchell had the phone to her ear. "Yes, I'd like to report a theft." I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't let Cruella DeVille get her hands on those animals. I stepped right between Mrs. Mitchell and the terrified animals, while she kept talking into her phone. "Olivia, take them to the back bedroom right now," I said firmly. The dogs started whimpering as they followed my daughter down the hallway. I could hear Mrs. Mitchell's voice getting louder as she told the dispatcher we were refusing to return her stolen property. The beagle's nails clicked frantically on the hardwood as it scrambled after Olivia. The German Shepherd mix kept looking back at Mrs. Mitchell with its ears flat against its head. I grabbed my phone and started snapping photos of the gray cat's infected wounds before Olivia could carry it away. The discharge around its eyes had crusted into thick yellow patches that matted the fur. I got 3 clear shots showing the swollen red skin underneath before Olivia scooped the cat up. Then I turned to the ferrets who were still hiding under the entertainment center. Their fur was so matted it looked like felt in some places. I managed to get several photos showing the painful-looking clumps before they retreated further back. Mrs. Mitchell stood in my doorway watching everything while her voice got even louder on the phone. She was demanding immediate police response and kept repeating our address. Her face had turned an angry red color and she kept pointing at me with her free hand. I watched her pace back and forth on my front porch through the window. Then I dialed the non-emergency line on my own phone. I explained to the dispatcher that we had 9 animals in our home showing severe neglect. I told them the owner was planning to sell them to a research lab the next day. The dispatcher said they would send someone for a welfare check along with responding to the theft report. I walked down the hallway to find Olivia sitting on the floor of our guest bedroom. All 9 animals had formed a protective circle around her. The terrier mix was curled in her lap while the cats perched on the bed. "Write down everything you heard yesterday about the lab pickup," I told her. She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. She had already taken screenshots of the lab's website showing their animal acquisition page. The page listed prices they paid for different types of animals. There were photos of their facility with rows of metal cages visible through windows. Olivia scrolled to show me more screenshots, including the lab's pickup schedule for our area. Tomorrow's date was circled with our neighbor's address listed next to it. "When the police get here, we stick to facts," I said quietly. "Tell them exactly what you saw and heard, nothing more." Olivia nodded and kept petting the shaking terrier in her arms. The German Shepherd had pressed itself against her side and wouldn't move. We both jumped when Mrs. Mitchell started pounding on our front door. She was screaming that she would sue us for everything we had. Her fists hit the door so hard that the pictures on our entry wall shook. "I want my property back immediately," she yelled through the door. The German Shepherd mix started cowering at the sound of her voice even from 2 rooms away. The cats all climbed higher on the furniture and the ferrets burrowed deeper into a pile of blankets Olivia had put down. 20 minutes passed with Mrs. Mitchell alternating between pounding and yelling threats. Then I saw a police cruiser pull up outside. Officer Rodriguez got out and walked up to where Mrs. Mitchell stood on my porch. She immediately started ranting about theft and demanding he arrest us right away. He held up his hand and told her calmly that he needed to assess the situation first. He asked her to step back to the sidewalk while he spoke with each party separately. Mrs. Mitchell kept arguing but finally moved away from my door. Officer Rodriguez knocked and identified himself before I opened it. He came inside and I explained we were trying to protect animals from neglect. I told him about the planned sale to a testing lab scheduled for the next morning. Olivia came out with her phone and showed him the photos of the wounds on the cats. She explained what she had overheard yesterday while babysitting. Officer Rodriguez took out his notebook and started writing everything down. He asked to see the animals himself to evaluate their condition. We led him to the back bedroom where all 9 animals were still huddled together. The moment Mrs. Mitchell's voice carried through the window, all 4 dogs tried to hide behind furniture. The beagle wedged itself under the dresser, while the German Shepherd pressed into the corner. The cats stayed on their high perches and wouldn't come down even when Officer Rodriguez spoke softly to them. He took out his phone and photographed the visible injuries on each animal. The infected areas on the gray cat looked even worse under the bright camera flash. He documented the matted fur on the ferrets and the obvious limp when the terrier mix tried to walk. "How long have you noticed these problems?" he asked while taking more photos. I told him Olivia had been mentioning concerns for months, but today was the first time I saw them up close. He nodded and continued documenting everything while the animals cowered at every sound from outside. Then Officer Rodriguez made a phone call requesting animal control to come evaluate the situation. He explained that he needed their expertise to determine if neglect had occurred. "The animals will remain here until animal control arrives to assess them," he announced. Through the window, we could hear Mrs. Mitchell screaming about her rights being violated. Officer Rodriguez pulled me aside near the kitchen while Olivia stayed with the animals in the back room. He explained that taking someone else's property was still theft, even if I thought I was doing the right thing. He said I could face real charges and needed to understand the seriousness of what my daughter had done. But then he looked back toward the bedroom where we could hear the dogs whimpering and said the injuries he saw were concerning enough that he wanted a full investigation. He told me to keep the animals comfortable and not let Mrs. Mitchell near them until animal control arrived to make an official assessment. I nodded and watched him go back outside to deal with Mrs. Mitchell, who was still yelling on our front lawn about her stolen pets. About 90 minutes later, a white van pulled up and a woman in a blue uniform got out carrying a clipboard and medical bag. Officer Rodriguez met her at the sidewalk and they talked for several minutes while Mrs. Mitchell stood there with her arms crossed. The woman came to our door and introduced herself as Katie Serrano from Animal Control. She asked to see the animals right away, so I led her to the back bedroom where all 9 of them were still hiding. Katie knelt down and started examining each animal one by one with gentle hands. She measured the infected areas on the gray cat's face with a small ruler and took photos of the discharge coming from its eyes. She checked the dog's muscle tone by feeling along their legs and backs, shaking her head at how thin they were under their fur. The German Shepherd mix had pressure sores on his hips from lying on hard surfaces too long. Katie documented everything in her notebook and took dozens of photos from different angles. She found mats so thick on the ferrets that their skin was raw underneath. The beagle had overgrown nails that curled under and made walking painful. Every animal showed signs of being kept in cages for extended periods without proper exercise or care. After examining all 9 animals, Katie stood up and started filling out official paperwork on her clipboard. She wrote for several minutes, then told me she was initiating a temporary protective custody order because the animals needed immediate medical attention. She said they couldn't be returned to Mrs. Mitchell until a full investigation was completed, which could take weeks. Through the window, I could hear Mrs. Mitchell screaming that she would sue everyone involved, including the city and the police department. Katie just kept writing calmly and didn't even look up at the noise. I asked Katie if we could take the terrier mix to our vet right away since his limp looked really bad. She said yes as long as we documented everything and gave her copies of all medical records. She helped us carefully lift the small dog into a carrier while Olivia grabbed towels to make him comfortable. Mrs. Mitchell must have seen us loading the dog because she came running over with her phone out recording everything. She shouted about theft and lawsuits and how we would pay for stealing her property. Katie stood between her and our car and calmly told her to step back, or she would call Officer Rodriguez over. Mrs. Mitchell kept filming but moved away from the vehicle. We drove the terrier to the emergency vet clinic 10 minutes away while he whimpered in the carrier. Mrs. Mitchell stormed off toward her house yelling that she was getting her ownership paperwork and calling a lawyer right now. As we pulled out of the driveway, I saw her on her phone and 20 minutes later my own phone started buzzing nonstop. She had posted on the neighborhood Facebook page calling us thieves and saying we had stolen her beloved pets. Messages from neighbors started flooding in asking what was happening and if it was true. Some people were already taking sides without knowing any facts. At the emergency clinic, we carried the terrier inside and explained the situation to the receptionist who got us into an exam room right away. Dr. Sarah Foster came in and gently examined the little dog who was shaking on the metal table. She felt along his leg, and he yelped when she touched a specific spot near his hip. She ordered x-rays immediately, and a technician carefully carried him to the back. When the images came up on the computer screen, Dr. Foster pointed to an obvious fracture in his leg bone that she said was at least 2 weeks old based on the healing pattern. The bone had started to heal wrong because it was never set properly. She also found a serious infection that had developed around the break and spread into the surrounding tissue. She started him on strong antibiotics right away and gave him pain medication that made him stop shaking for the first time since we brought him in. Dr. Foster continued examining the terrier and found more problems with every test she ran. His teeth were rotting and infected, which explained why he wouldn't eat dry food. He had chronic ear infections that had never been treated and were probably causing him constant pain. His blood work showed malnutrition and dehydration, even though Mrs. Mitchell claimed she fed them regularly. There were old scars on his body from untreated wounds that had healed badly. Dr. Foster documented everything in detail and took photographs of each injury and infection. She printed out copies of the x-rays showing the fracture and measured every wound with precise notes. She told us she was required by law to report this level of medical neglect to animal control immediately. She asked if we wanted her to examine all 9 animals since this was clearly a pattern of abuse. I told her yes, and she said she would contact Katie directly to arrange it. That evening, Katie called to tell me she had assigned an official case number, and all 9 animals were now under protective hold pending investigation. She had scheduled full veterinary exams for all of them tomorrow morning at Dr. Foster's clinic. She said both the neglect we had documented and the planned sale to the research lab would be thoroughly investigated. She warned me the process could take time, but the animals would be safe during the investigation. Later that night after we got home, Olivia showed me her phone with screenshots she had taken yesterday while babysitting. She had photographed Mrs. Mitchell's call history on the house phone showing multiple calls to a number she had looked up online. It belonged to the biomedical research facility Mrs. Mitchell had mentioned. There were callback times noted on a pad by the phone in Mrs. Mitchell's handwriting. Olivia had also recorded part of the actual conversation on her phone when Mrs. Mitchell was negotiating prices for the animals. You could hear her clearly saying she didn't care what happened to them after pickup as long as she got paid in cash. She specifically mentioned not wanting a paper trail and asked if they could pick up early in the morning before her daughter woke up for school. Around 9 that night, Officer Rodriguez called to tell me both parties needed to provide all documentation by tomorrow morning for the investigation. We needed to provide all our proof of neglect and abuse while Mrs. Mitchell needed to provide her proof of ownership. He said the research lab had been contacted about their scheduled pickup, and they were being questioned about their animal acquisition practices. He reminded me that we still might face charges, but said the evidence of neglect was substantial enough that the prosecutor would have to consider the circumstances. That night, after everyone left, I sat down with Olivia in her room where she was doing homework. I told her that while I was proud she cared about those animals, we couldn't just take things even if we thought it was the right thing to do. She looked up from her math book and said the animals would already be at the lab if she'd waited for anyone to help. I knew she was right, but explained that next time she needed to call the authorities first, before doing something that could get her arrested. She rolled her eyes and reminded me that Mrs. Mitchell was literally picking them up tomorrow morning before her daughter woke up. The next morning, Olivia dragged herself out of bed for school, clearly not wanting to leave while everything was still happening. I promised to keep her updated, and she made me swear to text her every single thing that happened. She grabbed her backpack and headed out, but I could see her checking her phone before she even reached the sidewalk. I spent the morning gathering all our evidence into folders while the animals stayed at the emergency vet for their exams. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Olivia, asking if the animals were okay, and whether Mrs. Mitchell had done anything else. Around 10, Katie showed up with a white van and 2 assistants to transport all 9 animals from the vet to the main clinic for their full workups. I met them there and watched as they had to physically carry each dog from the building because they were too scared to walk anywhere near Mrs. Mitchell's house, even though she wasn't outside. The German Shepherd had to be sedated just to get him in the van because he kept trying to hide behind the vet tech. The cats were easier since they were already in carriers, but you could hear them crying the whole time. While we were loading the last ferret, Mrs. Mitchell's car pulled into my driveway, and she got out carrying a manila folder. She marched up to me waving what she said were adoption papers for every single animal proving she owned them legally. She demanded Katie return them immediately, and claimed any medical problems were brand new and she'd already scheduled vet appointments for next week. Katie took the papers and reviewed them while Mrs. Mitchell stood there tapping her foot and glaring at me. Officer Rodriguez pulled up just as Mrs. Mitchell started yelling about discrimination and threatening to call every news station in the city. He looked at both sets of documents and told Mrs. Mitchell the animals would stay in protective custody until the investigation was complete. She screamed that this was illegal and pulled out her phone to call someone she said was a reporter friend. I spent the afternoon scanning and organizing everything we had, including Olivia's written statement about what she'd seen over the past 6 months of babysitting. The stack included photos of the injuries, screenshots of the lab's website, and Dr. Foster's initial medical report from last night. My hands were shaking as I uploaded everything to the case file Katie had created because I kept thinking about Olivia potentially getting a criminal record over this. Rodriguez called the biomedical lab that afternoon to request their pickup documentation, but they refused to provide anything without a subpoena. He told me he'd already started the paperwork for a warrant if they didn't cooperate voluntarily. Around 4, Dr. Foster emailed her complete medical reports on all 9 animals to animal control, the police department, and CC'd me on everything. The reports were 20 pages each and detailed infections that had been festering for months, broken bones that healed wrong without treatment, and severe malnutrition across the board. Every page had photos and measurements and dates showing this wasn't new neglect, but ongoing abuse. Just as I finished reading the reports, my phone rang, and it was Olivia's school counselor saying we needed to discuss an incident. Apparently, Olivia had gotten into an argument with some kids who saw Mrs. Mitchell's Facebook posts calling us thieves, and she defended herself by telling them about the animal abuse. The counselor wanted to meet tomorrow about Olivia's involvement in an adult neighborhood dispute, and how it was affecting her behavior at the school. I checked Facebook and saw Mrs. Mitchell had posted 3 times already today, including an old photo of her daughter crying that she claimed was from today. She wrote long posts about how we'd destroyed her family and stolen her daughter's beloved pets out of jealousy and spite. The comments were split between people supporting her and others asking why the animals were so sick if she loved them so much. Some neighbors were sharing their own observations about never seeing the dogs outside and hearing them crying at night. Mrs. Mitchell responded to every critical comment with accusations and threats to sue for defamation. By dinner time, the whole neighborhood Facebook group was arguing about whether taking abused animals was theft or rescue. Katie called me the next morning to say she'd reached the lab through official channels and they'd confirmed everything. They had a pickup scheduled for 9 animals at Mrs. Mitchell's address for $5,000 total. The lab claimed it was all for humane research purposes, and they'd followed proper procedures. Katie read me their statement over the phone while I paced my kitchen. They said Mrs. Mitchell had contacted them through their website's animal acquisition program 3 weeks ago. She'd sent photos of the animals and signed forms saying she was the legal owner. The lab insisted they'd done nothing wrong since she had ownership papers for all 9 animals. They were canceling the pickup immediately, but maintained they operated within all legal guidelines. Katie said their quick cancellation and defensive tone suggested they knew this looked bad. 2 days later, my phone rang, and it was someone named Fatima Vasquez from Child Protective Services. She explained they'd opened an inquiry due to concerns about a child being exposed to animal cruelty. She needed to interview both Olivia and Mrs. Mitchell's daughter about what they'd witnessed in the home. My stomach twisted as I agreed to the meeting. Fatima came to our house that Thursday afternoon with a clipboard and a gentle voice. I sat next to Olivia on our couch while she asked careful questions about the babysitting. Olivia stayed calm and factual as she described hearing dogs crying in the basement for hours. She told Fatima about Mrs. Mitchell's daughter begging her mom to let the animals come upstairs. She explained how the girl would sneak dog treats in her pockets to feed them through the cage bars. Olivia described finding the cats locked in a bathroom with no litter box for entire weekends. She talked about the ferrets being kept in a tiny carrier meant for transport, not living. Fatima took notes without showing any reaction, but I could see her hand tightening on her pen. Olivia mentioned the daughter crying when she found out her mom was planning to sell the pets. She'd overheard the girl on the phone with her dad begging him to stop it. Fatima asked more questions about the home environment and how often these things happened. Olivia answered everything honestly without adding drama or exaggeration. She just laid out months of observations in a steady voice. Meanwhile, Officer Rodriguez had been busy with his investigation. He called to update me that he'd obtained Mrs. Mitchell's financial records through a court order. The records showed she'd bought a $3,000 designer purse last month at the mall. She'd also spent $800 on shoes and $1,200 on jewelry in the past 2 months. But there were no vet bills paid for over a year, despite the animal's obvious medical needs. The last vet visit on record was 14 months ago for basic shots. Rodriguez said the contrast between luxury spending and animal neglect was clear evidence of willful neglect. He was adding it to the case file for the prosecutor to review. 3 days after that, I got official notice that Mrs. Mitchell had formally filed theft charges against both me and Olivia. The paperwork arrived by certified mail, and my hands shook as I signed for it. She was claiming we'd stolen property valued at over $5,000. The district attorney's office included a letter saying they'd review both the theft complaint and the animal neglect case. They'd make a decision about charges within 30 days. I felt sick thinking about my teenage daughter potentially getting a criminal record over saving animals. I called Katie immediately, and she tried to reassure me that the evidence was on our side. She said she was already working on the next step to protect the animals legally. Katie had petitioned the court for continued custody of all 9 animals based on the documented neglect. She was also citing the attempted sale to a research facility as evidence they were in danger. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for next week, and we'd all need to testify. She emailed me the court documents showing the petition had been accepted for review. The judge would decide if the animals stayed in protective custody or went back to Mrs. Mitchell. That same afternoon, a courier delivered a letter to my house from the biomedical lab. The letter was short and formal, stating they were withdrawing from the situation entirely. They wouldn't be pursuing any animals from Mrs. Mitchell now or in the future. They wanted no further involvement and asked not to be contacted about this matter again. Katie said their quick exit meant they knew this could damage their reputation. 2 days before the hearing, I was taking out the trash when Mrs. Mitchell came storming across our shared driveway. She started screaming that I'd ruined her life and turned her daughter against her. She said I was a terrible mother who'd raised a thief and a liar. She claimed her daughter wouldn't even talk to her anymore because of what we'd done. Her face was red and she was waving her arms as she yelled about suing me for everything. Officer Rodriguez happened to pull up right then for a follow-up visit and saw the whole thing. He immediately got out of his car and told Mrs. Mitchell to step back and calm down. She turned on him next, screaming about harassment and discrimination, and how we'd all conspired against her. Rodriguez calmly told her she needed to maintain distance from me and my family, or face harassment charges. He said any further confrontations would result in a restraining order being issued. Mrs. Mitchell stomped back to her house, still yelling threats about lawyers and lawsuits. After she left, I was so stressed I called a legal aid hotline for advice about the theft charges. The attorney who answered listened to my whole story and then gave me his assessment. He said that while we had technically committed theft by taking the animals, prosecutors rarely pursued these cases. When there was clear evidence of animal abuse being prevented, juries wouldn't convict. He still recommended we get proper representation just to be safe about protecting Olivia's future. 3 days later, Fatima showed up at our door with a clipboard and said she needed to interview everyone separately about the situation. She spent 2 hours with Mrs. Mitchell first, while I watched through my window as they walked around her property and went inside her house. Fatima took photos of the basement where the dogs had been kept and made notes about the empty cages still sitting there with old food bowls crusted over. Then she interviewed Mrs. Mitchell's daughter at their kitchen table while Mrs. Mitchell paced in the living room. After that, Fatima came to our house and asked Olivia detailed questions about what she'd seen and heard while babysitting over the past 6 months. Olivia showed her the screenshots from Mrs. Mitchell's phone and the recording of the lab conversation, and Fatima's face got more serious with each piece of evidence. She implemented a safety plan that same day, requiring Mrs. Mitchell to attend weekly parenting classes and have monthly home visits from CPS. The paperwork said Mrs. Mitchell's daughter would stay in the home, but with regular monitoring to ensure no more neglect occurred. 2 weeks passed before we heard from the district attorney's office about the criminal charges. Nicholas Romero called me personally to explain he was reviewing all the evidence and would likely pursue misdemeanor animal neglect charges against Mrs. Mitchell based on the vet reports and witness statements. He said the theft charges against us were still under review, but he understood the circumstances that led to our actions. The waiting made my stomach hurt every single day. I couldn't eat properly and kept checking my phone constantly for updates. Olivia came home from the school the next Monday with red eyes and wouldn't talk to me for an hour. She finally told me some kids were calling her a thief because Mrs. Mitchell had posted about it on the neighborhood Facebook page. One boy said his mom told him to stay away from her because she was a criminal. Olivia said she didn't care what they thought because she'd do it again to save those animals. We sat at the kitchen table and I explained that sometimes doing the right thing means facing hard consequences, and not everyone will understand your choices. She nodded, but I could see it still hurt her to be treated differently at the school. A month later, the preliminary hearing notice arrived in our mailbox and my hands shook opening it. Both sides had to appear in court next week to present initial evidence and arguments. I called my parents that night and asked for help hiring a lawyer because I couldn't risk Olivia getting a criminal record over this. They wired me money the next day, and I found an attorney who specialized in these kinds of cases. She reviewed everything and said we had a strong defense based on preventing imminent harm to the animals. The morning of the hearing, I threw up twice from nerves. During negotiations in the hallway outside the courtroom, Mrs. Mitchell's lawyer pulled her aside and I could see them arguing. The prosecutor offered her a plea deal to surrender the animals permanently, pay $2,000 in fines, complete 40 hours of animal welfare classes, and avoid any jail time. Her lawyer kept pointing at the paperwork and shaking his head like she should take it. Mrs. Mitchell's face was red and she kept looking over at us with pure hatred. Inside the courtroom, Olivia and I gave our sworn statements about everything we'd witnessed. We stuck to just the facts about the infected wounds, the animals' fear responses, and the planned sale to the testing lab. Olivia's voice shook when she described hearing the dogs crying in the basement for hours while she babysat upstairs. I explained finding the terrier's untreated broken leg and seeing ribs showing through their fur. The judge took notes and asked us specific questions about dates and times. Dr. Foster testified next and pulled up photos on a screen that made several people in the gallery gasp out loud. The infected areas on the cats were worse than even I'd realized, with pus and open sores visible in the close-up shots. She explained how the dental disease in 3 of the dogs indicated years without basic care. Katie presented her behavioral assessments showing clear patterns of long-term abuse based on how the animals cowered and showed signs of learned helplessness. She described how they'd initially refused food because they were so used to irregular feeding. After 2 hours of testimony, Mrs. Mitchell stood up and accepted the plea deal. She signed the papers surrendering all 9 animals while glaring at us across the courtroom. Her hand shook as she wrote her name and her lawyer had to point to where she needed to initial. The judge accepted the agreement and scheduled her classes to start the following week. Nicholas Romero stood up and announced the theft charges against us were officially declined, given the circumstances and clear evidence of imminent harm to the animals. He said Olivia would receive a warning about trespassing, but would face no criminal record or further consequences. My legs nearly gave out from relief and I grabbed Olivia's hand so tight she winced. 3 days later, Katie called to say the animals were being transferred to a specialized rescue organization for rehabilitation. They had foster homes lined up for each animal after medical treatment was complete. We drove to the shelter to say goodbye and watched as volunteers loaded them into transport crates with soft blankets and toys. The terrier's leg was in a proper cast now and the cat's wounds were healing with medication. The rescue coordinator promised to send us updates on their progress and said they'd all find good homes once they were healthy. Watching them leave felt like losing something important, but I knew they were going somewhere safe where people would help them heal from everything they'd been through. 2 weeks passed before Fatima showed up at our door with a thick folder and asked if she could come in for a few minutes. She spread papers across our kitchen table showing the safety plan she'd put together for Mrs. Mitchell's family after completing her investigation. The plan required Mrs. Mitchell to attend parenting classes every Tuesday evening for 6 months at the community center downtown. Monthly home visits would check on her daughter's well-being, and the family would get connected with financial planning resources through the county. Fatima explained it wasn't perfect, but it would provide oversight and support that hadn't existed before. The next Saturday, Katie called to ask if Olivia wanted to join a youth volunteer program at the animal shelter that taught kids proper advocacy methods. Olivia jumped at the chance and started going 3 afternoons a week after school to help socialize cats and walk dogs who were waiting for adoption. She learned about proper reporting channels for suspected abuse and helped create educational materials about responsible pet ownership. Our walks around the neighborhood became awkward as some neighbors crossed the street to avoid us, while others would stop us to quietly say we did the right thing. The woman from 2 houses down slipped a thank you card in our mailbox, saying she'd always worried about those animals but never knew what to do. The family across the street stopped inviting us to their barbecues, and their kids weren't allowed to play with Olivia anymore. We learned to live with the divided opinions and uncomfortable grocery store encounters. Katie called every few weeks with updates about the animals' progress in their foster homes. The dogs were gaining weight steadily and learning to trust people again through patient training sessions. All 3 cats had their infections cleared up with proper medication and were starting to play with toys for the first time. The ferrets were being socialized by an experienced exotic animal rescuer who said they'd make great pets once they learned humans meant safety, not fear. The terrier mix's broken leg healed properly with surgery and physical therapy, and Katie sent us a video of him running around a backyard without any limp. One evening, Olivia and I sat on the couch going through the photos and videos Katie had sent of the animals thriving in their foster homes. I told her I was proud of her for caring so much, but we needed to talk about how to handle these situations legally in the future. She agreed that next time she'd call animal control first, instead of taking matters into her own hands, though she pointed out the animals would have been at the lab by the time anyone responded. We talked about the difference between moral rightness and legal rightness and how sometimes they don't align perfectly. She understood she'd taken a huge risk, but said she'd learned she had the courage to stand up against cruelty even when it was scary. Mrs. Mitchell kept her distance, but I heard from other neighbors that she was attending her required classes at the community center every week. She'd stopped posting angry messages online, and there hadn't been any more confrontations in our shared driveway. Fatima told us during one of her check-ins that Mrs. Mitchell was cooperating with all requirements, and her daughter was doing better with the support services in place. The girl was seeing a counselor at the school, and had joined an after-school art program that gave her positive outlets. 6 weeks after everything happened, Olivia came home from the store looking shaken, and told me she'd run into Mrs. Mitchell's daughter by the frozen foods. They'd stood there staring at each other for an uncomfortable moment, before the girl quietly said she was glad the animals were safe now. Olivia just nodded and they went their separate ways without any other words, but she said the girl looked less angry than she'd expected. Looking back at everything that happened over those intense weeks, I felt completely drained but also proud that we'd stood up for those animals despite the legal risks. The theft charges could have ruined Olivia's future, but we'd chosen to protect innocent creatures from torture and suffering. Our community relationships might never fully recover, and some people would always see us as troublemakers who overstepped boundaries. Olivia volunteered at the shelter every week now, learning the right ways to help animals and building skills she could use in the future. The 9 animals we'd rescued were thriving in their new homes according to Katie's latest update, living the lives they deserved with people who actually cared about them. We'd learned that doing the right thing sometimes means accepting hard consequences and living with other people's judgment. If faced with the same situation again, knowing everything that followed, we'd still make the exact same choice to save those animals from that lab. Thanks for letting me wonder about all these interesting turns today. It's definitely been something exploring these questions together. Until we meet again. Like the video, it helps more than you think.